Chapter 5. Peculiar Proposition. As Mike rattled along the ragged roadway, enduring his disagreeable joyride, Z slaved away at the attendant's homestead. His limbs trembled after operating the weighty saw all morning. The sultry air had taken the moisture from Z's breath as it escaped through his parched lips. No matter how much he coughed, hacked, or cleared his windpipe, he couldn't clear the sawdust from his dry throat and lungs. Though eager to earn his passage from this hillbilly hell as quickly as possible, it was time for a break. Leaving the log on the conveyor unfinished, Z reached out and switched off the saw. He stood mesmerized as he watched its treacherous blade slowly spin to a stop. With the discordant wailing of the machine silenced, the sounds of the hillside reemerged. For someone not engulfed in such dire circumstances, the sounds of the birds and breeze could have offered a pleasant backdrop for an introspective interlude. But Z no longer cared for such indulgences. He only desired to quell his suffering. From his spot in the shed, he studied the house. Except for a few mismatched chickens scratching about, all was still in the backyard. He crept to the back door and knocked. No answer. He then walked a brisk pass around the house and property to ensure no one was home. Satisfied, he returned to the shed, retrieved his pry bars and soda cans, and set off to the well. He organized the empty cans on the ground beside the well, scooted the cap to the side with his pry bar, then dropped the bucket into the hole. After filling a can and swallowing a swig, he abruptly choked when Z sensed he was not alone. He snapped up straight like a deer flushed from the brush and turned his face to his stalker. There, he discovered Honey Pie standing in the open, wordlessly watching. Sputtering and spitting, Z struggled to speak. Apparently amused by the asphyxiation, Honey Pie stared sternly while also smiling slightly, then sluggardly said, I thought so. You're gonna have to pay extra for that water." More composed and only intermittently coughing, Z held his peace and considered just exactly what Honey Pie was implying. Honey Pie said, "I know your type. You're a charmer. But I still might be convinced to turn a blind eye." What in the world is she talking about? Z wondered. Under different circumstances, and considering only physical appearances, a woman like Honey Pie could have captivated Z's attention. Sure, she was homely, plain, and poorly dressed, but she was also reasonably shaped and attainable. However, here against the backdrop of destitution, death, and disaster, any such shenanigans were the farthest thing from his mind, especially since her hygiene was questionable, and her slurred speech and sleepy eyes gave the impression Honey Pie was either mentally impaired, uneducated, intoxicated, or any combination of the three. Finally, finding his voice, Z said, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to steal, but no one has offered me any food or water since I've been here. Could we please not tell—" Z was unsure how to describe the attendant, having never discovered the man's name or whether he might be Honey Pie's father, uncle, brother, or husband. Slowly, she sauntered over to Z, exaggerating the swish of her hips, believing herself to be coy and seductive, but achieving neither. Stopping with her face barely below his, Honey Pie looked up into his eyes and whispered, "This could be our little secret," placing an upturned index finger underneath his chin. Her breath smelled of tuna and pickles. Despite the disconcerting nature of this close encounter, Z realized something. Food. She had food. Appalled at her innuendo, repulsed at the thought, but sensing sandwiches, Z held his ground and her gaze. He asked, "Could you find me something to eat?" Troubled, Honey Pie jerked as if Z had said something horribly hurtful, and she moved away to stare into the surrounding thicket. Z didn't comprehend the erratic behavior and did nothing. Although pushed to the limits of his physical endurance, exhausted and starving, Z maintained his powers of absolute coolness and weathered this drastic interlude without word or action. Honey Pie's mini fit only lasted seconds, but to Z it seemed an eternity. Soon, just as abruptly, she turned back. "You know, he ain't as spry as he used to be." Thoroughly confused, Z shed a sliver of his composure and stood motionless with his mouth gaping open. Honey Pie added, "I'll be in the house by myself if anybody wants to know. Be sure and stay out of the can by the dryer." Then Honey Pie left, shaking her stuff more than ever. Not understanding what bizarre scenario she intended, Z was perplexed for some time before finishing his drink and replacing the well cap. He considered what she meant about staying out of the can by the dryer. He might have seen a rusted metal trash can next to a discarded appliance. Was she telling him not to go there, or hinting that he should go there, possibly for food? How did Honey Pie expect him to react to her awkward advance? Was she really upset? Would she inform the attendant about Z hacking the well? Only time could tell. But one thing was certain, Honey Pie had issues. Hoping he had heard the last of her, Z headed back to the shed. Along the mountain highway, Mike followed for over an hour before Hedad turned onto an underdeveloped road. Inside a cloud of dust, Mike tailed his host as the path wound upwards and around over gravel and dirt until at last Hedad pulled over at an open space among the trees. In a mountainous meadow, one giant oak had endured the ages and stood defiant in the middle like the master of the woods. On the far side of the grassy field, a pleasant stream fueled a waterfall and filled a pool before continuing down the hillside. Butterflies, honeybees, and dragonflies flitted, buzzed, and zigzagged about among the wind-blown grasses and wildflowers in the spirited plain. Dismounting, the men pulled off their helmets. Hedad, always smiling, gave Mike a slap on the shoulder, releasing a broom of dust from his shirt. "Rides great, doesn't it?" Was he messing with him? Surely, as much as he adored motorcycles, Hedad would have known this was the worst riding two-wheeler ever built. With doubts rising, but unwilling to contradict his enigmatic tour guide, Mike lied. "It's okay." Hedad made for the pool, with Mike ambling close behind. Standing on its rocky banks, Hedad pointed over the oasis and declared, "Devil's Triangle," then paused, allowing adequate time for mysterious effect to settle in. "Come on, let's take a dip," he said, never suppressing his smile. "Oh, I don't know," Mike said. "Sure you do. It's a hot day. You're covered in dust. You can't tell me a swim in a pool of mountain water on a hot day wouldn't feel great." Once again, the logic was sound. A swim in a cool pool of mountain water on a hot day would feel great. But a swim in a cool pool of mountain water on a hot day with Hedad was becoming increasingly unappealing. Still unwilling to reveal his true feelings at the risk of disappointing Hedad, Mike felt compelled to comply. Mike had assumed they would swim in their boxers, as they hadn't packed swim trunks. But while he struggled with his socks, Hedad stripped off every stitch of clothing and dove headfirst into the icy spring. "Whoo!" he bellowed as he resurfaced. "That'll wake you up in the morning. Come on in, buddy." Swimming in a remote, picturesque mountain hideaway, with springtime budding all around, might sound incredibly idealistic, but for Mike, the reality of this endeavor was quickly becoming nightmarish. Retaining his boxers, Mike waded in. The frigid water stole his first breath, but Mike persisted and submerged his shins, then his navel, and up to his chest until he was up to his neck in it. Gleeful, Hedad said, "There you go, buddy. Refreshing, huh?" This was probably the most awkward moment of Mike's life. Whatever Hedad's ambitions, Mike had never been comfortable with male nudity. Keeping his distance, he attempted to distract himself from the fact that he swam alone with a burly naked man of questionable intent by asking, "So, why do they call it Devil's Triangle?" Speaking no differently than when they had conversed at the kitchen table that morning, Hedad answered, "Well, one side of the triangle, or pyramid, represents the fire of life. One represents God, or whatever you want to call it, and the other, the impulses of instinct. All three support each other and are connected and guide your actions to balance your soul, its desires, and the spirit world equally. As above, so below." What an answer. And his reasoning certainly did not sit well with Mike's fundamentalist background. He furrowed his mustache and asked, "So, why do you call it Devil's Triangle and not God's Triangle then?" "Oh, it's all the same thing," Hedad said. "There's good and bad in all of us. What some people call good, others might call bad, and vice versa. Who knows? It's all subjective, really. It's up to us to decide what's right or wrong for each of us individually. I mean, what dark secrets are you hiding underneath that dirty little dirt squirrel?" Okay, now this was the most awkward moment of Mike's life. Even if he felt compelled to share whatever resided in the hidden recesses of his mind with someone, it would not be with a naked Hedad in an isolated mountain meadow, no matter how picturesque. Feeling he had satisfied Hedad's request for an obligatory dip, Mike said, "Well, okay then." He started for the bank before anything more weird could happen. "You done?" Hedad asked, disappointed. "Yeah, I'm good," Mike declared as he claimed a spot next to his clothes. There, he gave redressing his full attention and refused to look in Hedad's direction, hoping he would soon get bored. Before long, Mike's brilliant plan paid off, and Hedad left the pool unashamed. After dressing, the two left the triangle and started back to the ranch. On their return journey, Mike's soggy underwear intensified his discomfort on the already excruciating ride. But before making it all the way back to the ranch, Hedad pulled into a gravel parking lot surrounding one of the structures along the main road Mike had observed earlier as they passed. The structure was a large, black, box-shaped cinder block building with a single door in the middle of the front wall and a blackened window to its side. There were no clues to indicate the purpose of this structure, except hand-painted in red letters on the smoky window were the word Mad Mama's Cafe. In the parking lot sat a green rusty pickup and a battered yellow two-door sedan. "Come on," Hedad said. "You'll love these guys." Mike's desire not to go inside was extreme. Hey, I really need to be getting back. I gotta get going," he stammered, although he had mentioned earlier that morning that he had some extra time. Feeling panicked, Mike began considering his options. He didn't think he could survive a physical altercation with Hedad. Taking off on the classic jalopy, speeding back to the ranch to retrieve his motorcycle, still without fuel, among minions of ranch hands, and no doubt with Hedad and his buddies from inside this establishment hot on his trail, probably wouldn't work either. Pulling the plug wires off the chopper and taking off on Hedad's motorcycle seemed an even worse idea. "Come on, we won't stay long," he dad said. Resigned, Mike followed with uneasy terror churning within him. Outside, all was quiet, but as soon as he dad cracked the door, the pair was bombarded by electronic dance music blaring at deafening decibels. After following Hedad through the heavy door, Mike saw all the trimmings within were those of a country and western bar, despite the deafening urban beats. The air was thick with the fumes from a myriad of carcinogens. Ample amounts of neon signs hung above a central bar that lit the establishment. There were 2 pool tables and a well-worn mechanical bull. Paint was chipped off the stain-smeared concrete floor around its base. Around the tables and chairs lining the back of the building, the walls were decorated with hand-painted murals depicting locals engaged in the affairs of rural life, probably etched by someone doing well in a 5th grade art class. A hefty, angry-faced woman with creative piercings and too much styling gel in her spiking hair attended the bar. Her only patrons were 2 young men seated before her. They were both dressed in urban clothes, clean-shaven, and had curious hairstyles. One was just as strikingly small as the other was imposingly large. They openly shared a stick of marijuana wrapped in a flavored tobacco leaf. Hedad boisterously greeted the pair. "Pete, Woody, what's happening?" Lethargically, they turned. "Oh, hey." Not bothering to introduce Mike, Hedad took a seat along the bar beside the 2, leaving Mike to sit at the farthest end. Unconcerned about Mike, the shorter one passed the blunt to Hedad. After taking a pull, he offered it to Mike, who gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. Without pressing the issue, Hedad took another drag and passed the stick back. Content to shout over the blaring noise, Hedad proceeded to rattle on for hours about trivial matters with the boys. To Mike, it seemed Hedad's greatest pleasure in life, apart from making Mike uncomfortable, was hearing himself talk. Occasionally, Mike would attempt to show interest in their conversation, but he mostly stared blankly while sipping a beer. Mike's discomfort increased until he eventually mustered the courage to speak up. Leaning into Hedad, he said, Hey, I really need to get going." Looking hurt, Hedad agreed. After a few more changes of topic, he stood up. When Mike offered to pay the barkeep for his beer, she looked at him as if he had 2 heads. Hedad whispered to Mike in that "you can shut up now" kind of voice, "Don't worry about it, I've got it." As he headed for the door, Mike didn't notice any money exchange hands. Outside, they saddled up, headed homeward, and arrived at Hedad's ranch as the sun was setting. There, Mike's superbike remained in its spot, noble, decorated, and proud, but still thirsty. As they were securing their helmets, Celine came outside and announced, "Chili's reheating." She gave Hedad a little peck on his hairy cheek. Turning to Mike, Hedad said, "I know you've got to get going, but you've got time to eat a bowl of chili, right?" Mike had not eaten all day since that wonderful breakfast, nor anything to drink besides 2 beers at the Mad Mama's Cafe. That, along with the fumes and the undulation from his hellish ride, had left him nauseated. Still, Mike felt some hot chili might be just what was needed. Hedad appeared oblivious to Mike's growing disdain for him. So, leaving all 3 bikes outside, they went into the house. Indeed, the chili was refreshing and delicious, served with sweet tea and crackers. After eating his fill, Mike revived and tried again to make his escape. "Well, thanks for everything. It's been great, but I really need to..." Hedad stopped him. "You know, friend, it's been a long day, and I'm beat and ready to go to bed. We're going to have to move all those bikes in my shed to get around to the pump. Why don't you stay another night, and we'll take care of it first thing in the morning." Stuck. Could he have demanded Hedad's gift of fuel now? Offering them money might be an insult to their hospitality. Mike agreed to another night in the guest house. That night, rest did not come easily. Furious and trapped, Mike was unaccustomed to having his schedule dictated. Back home, he was the boss. Now, he was the one taking orders, albeit polite ones. He sat up in his bed, exhausted, but entirely too mentally alert and agitated to rest. After tirelessly surfing the channels, sleep eventually came in the early morning hours, just as heavily as the night before. As Mike sank into the swirls of his subconscious, he dreamt of Megan, his wife, pushing into the room in the same manner as Celine, but instead of delicacies, she piled armloads of organic bath soap onto the countertop. The detergents overflowed into the room in a foamy froth until Mike was unable to move without sliding on the suds. Flopping about and fighting for footing, the water thickened into a murky, muddy muck. As Mike strained, a crowd of people moved around him, attending to their own affairs and impervious to his distress. His expensive hiking shoes came off his feet as Mike tried to free himself from the sludge. When he dug about in the mess for his footwear, a thick vine burst from the mire and clung to his skin, taking root in Mike's flesh as it grew around his body, restraining him. All the while, he could hear Celine's entrancing voice circling on the winds and singing, "Hello, hello, hello." At this image, Mike snapped awake, more troubled than ever. Rousing himself early in the morning, Mike attended to his grooming and gathered his belongings. After making the bed, he straightened the room as best as he could. Then he hurried downstairs and stashed his things in their proper place in the luggage compartments on his bike. Before engaging his suspiciously philanthropic host, Mike took a deep breath and prepared his parting words, determined to keep the conversation polite but direct. Trying to exude confidence, he approached the house. Peering through the door, Mike could see Hedad and Celine having breakfast, so he rapped on the window. They beckoned him inside. Several times he thanked them and attempted to leave, only to be dissuaded, but now it was truly time to go. Intent on departing, Mike greeted the pair and went to say goodbye, hoping it would prompt the offer of fuel. Hedad said first, "Hey, listen, we've got a big get-together coming up, a party of sorts, and if it wouldn't be too much trouble, we really could use a little bit of help." Apologetic, but insistent, Mike said, "I really need to get going." Without warning, Celine said, "You mean you're just going to come up here, eat our food, rest in our house, get treated like some sort of flipping king, and when we ask you to help us move a few chairs, you're going to flake out on us? Hedad, are you hearing this?" Until this moment, Celine's presence had been somewhat comforting. Now, even though she spoke almost playfully, her words felt sharp and dangerous. With a look, Hedad shushed Celine and returned his attention to Mike. "Well, it would help us out," Hedad said. "It really is the least you could do. We haven't asked for any money or anything, just trying to be good neighbors and all. I tell you what, if you'll come and do this for us, we'll just call it even. I'll get one of my workers to fill up your bike while we're gone, and you'll be ready to go as soon as we get back." Yet again, unable to dispute the logic, Mike could only wonder what would be the end of the matter. "All right," Mike woefully sighed. "Great," Hedad said. "Okay, I'll need your keys." "My keys?" Mike asked. "Yeah, so my guys can fill up your bike." How was it impossible for Mike to deny Hedad? How was it, even though he spoke as if making a request, refusing seemed unacceptable? Although Mike no longer trusted his would-be savior, he dug his keys from his pocket, removed the motorcycle key from the ring, and handed it to Hedad. Accepting the key, Hedad's toothy smile returned in its full glory, and he said with renewed vigor, "Eat up, we've got a big day." Mike filled a plate with delicious food and ate. After breakfast, they left Selene at the house and departed together in Hedad's truck. As they rolled between the pastures, Mike longingly gazed at his bike in the side view mirror, eager to escape this unexpected detention. Instead of returning to the main highway, Hedad rounded a corner and rambled around the perimeter of his fields until the track entered the forest on the far side of his property. Creeping through the canopy, maybe 10 or 15 miles, they traveled always downward until they arrived at a lush clearing by a vast lake in the valley floor. Several trucks and off-road vehicles were already there, and people milled about, unfolding plastic tables and chairs and setting up portable shelters in a common area by the beach. The scent of freshly mown grass permeated the air. Continuing around the foot of the mountain, the lake disappeared into the valley. On its banks, ancient trees stood exposed in a well-manicured forest, free of briars and foliage. Classic rock music boomed from one of the vehicles. Apparently in agreement over the choice of tunes, everyone worked together preparing for the gathering. Hedad immediately engaged a crowd of workers and walked off, leaving Mike standing there alone once again without bothering to introduce him to anyone. A youthful man, apparently too young to legally drink, offered Mike a beer from a cooler as he stood taking in the activities. Declining the offer, Mike settled for a bottle of water from a different cooler and joined the crowd. He was brought here to set out chairs, so he started setting out chairs. Indeed, there were a great number of chairs, but with the large horde of happy helpers already there, Mike didn't see why they would need his help. Nonetheless, the sooner the task was complete, the sooner they could leave. Keeping a careful eye on the preparations, Mike was ever assessing the progress and wondering when it would reach enough of a state of completion to satisfy Hedad so they could get back to the ranch and to his ride and to his way out of here.